Ms. Unamäe-Kirk, it's good to have a talk with you here in Objective.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
We've seen many different areas, from World Health Organization's treaties to the politics of ever more undemocratic European Union, and among our own national governments, the spreading of totalitarian mentality, of imposing the ideologies and politics to the masses by increasingly brute force. The COVID mandates and lockdowns were examples of this. Why is it that so-called Western democracies resemble more and more kind of an Orwellian dictatorship in almost every level?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and a very long-winded one too, Marcus. And as they say, it really is the $6 million question, isn't it? And I don't know if anybody has the complete answer to it, but most of us probably have a piece of the puzzle. And for what it's worth, I can tell you what I think about all of that. Okay, it's a problem, obviously, that has to be dealt with on many different levels. One could argue that many of the systems we saw in operation, for example, at the beginning of the century or in the early part of the century, like Bolshevism, communism, Nazism, fascism, that they never really went away. You know, we thought they did, but that they've started to come back in a different kind of form. You know, I think it was Mussolini who said that fascism really is the, it's the connection between state, between corporations and the state. And we have that now in so many areas of life with this public partnership agreements. I mean, it's very much part of even the whole pandemic treaty agreement that I know that you've discussed with my colleagues. But I think the events that have happened, which really probably culminated with COVID in 2020, have been in the making for a long, long time. It didn't just happen suddenly. And I think, for example, one of the things that I noticed, particularly in my own country, was that certain people were put in place. And I saw this happening maybe about 20 years ago. I noticed that certain people were given certain appointments. They were appointed to positions of public importance or prominence. And I wondered why, because it wasn't exactly on merit. Now, that isn't to say, of course, that there are not very many amazing, wonderful people in positions of power in my country who absolutely deserve to be there. And they did get there on merit. But likewise, there were many who did not. And I wondered, how did they get this job? Why was this person appointed to this position? And it was a mystery to me until COVID came. And then I said, ha. Now I know they had to have their people in place. And what's interesting about that, and I'll talk about the WF in a minute and remind me to talk about that, but for example, if you want to get a job in the public service in our country, and that really relates to almost all positions, unless you're a politician and you're completely independent, almost everything else has an element of being part of a public service system. You have to, for example, demonstrate that you have a capacity for a concept known as critical thinking. I know this personally, and what amazed me and indeed sometimes amused me was that when COVID came and I thought, look at all these people in positions of power, where is their faculty for critical thinking? It was completely absent. It was completely missing. So do you get my point? That was an essential requirement for them to get the position, but yet clearly they got that position because they were very suitable for it on the basis that they were not going to rock the boat or exercise any of their critical thinking faculties in challenging the narrative. So that's why the narrative never got challenged, I believe, in my country, because most of the people were in place, in positions of power. Secondly, there was a huge element of fear and panic. And I think everybody got affected by that. There's no doubt about it. Then another element was the influence of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. And as you know, he had this Young Leaders program. And I think it is very significant that so many of the leaders who were in positions of power during COVID coincidentally were graduates of the Klaus Schwab School of Global Governance. Like, for example, in my country, we had a very young Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. Taoiseach is the Gaelic name for chieftain or prime minister in my country. So he was very much involved with the World Economic Forum. Boris Johnson in the UK, Angela Merkel in Germany, Emmanuel Macron in France, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Justin Trudeau in Canada, and Gavin Newsom. So there's just an example of people who are very influential during COVID in terms of encouraging, promoting lockdowns and all the government overreach that we know took place throughout the world. And mysteriously, they were all graduates of the Klaus Schwab School of Global Governance. So I think that was no accident.
Absolutely not. And what about the common resistance in Ireland during those days and today?
There wasn't very much. I have to say I was part of it and I paid a high price. I lost my career, lost my income. And as a result of all of that, I was a lawyer and I spoke out against government overreach at the time. And I definitely paid the price for that. But I'm still here and fighting back. So that is very good. What I do think is that whilst there was an element of such fear that really paralysed people. I think all over the world, not just in Ireland, people were genuinely very, very frightened during COVID, which I think was dreadful that the governments and especially the media, the mainstream legacy media, encouraged this fear and they fomented fear. And I think that was a shocking thing for them to have done. And people suffered a lot as a consequence. But interestingly now, there has been a shift and there has been a change. And I feel that people are wakening up and they are thinking now more critically about what happened during COVID and how their government behaved. And I don't think they're too happy about it. So that's a good thing. And I'm happy that that has happened.
What about if another pandemic would be announced? Would the reactions be the same?
I don't think so, because more people are more aware and more alert now than they ever were before. And I do think, especially in my own country, Ireland, that people are less trusting of the government. And I think, for example, that has been demonstrated in a couple of ways. One was a recent referendum we had, and the other is really in the number of independent candidates who are now seeking election in our elections in June. We have local elections at the local level, and we also have the European elections. And there's quite a substantial number of candidates standing for both. I am, in fact, a candidate for the European elections in June. I'm an independent candidate, for example. So it will be very interesting to see how well the independent people will do. But there is an expectation that they will do well because, as I said, there is an increasing and growing mistrust of the government parties. And we had a very interesting referenda in Ireland recently. We have a constitution, as you know, and in order to change our constitution, we have to have what's known as a constitutional referendum, and the people have the opportunity to decide on that. So they want to do some very strange things with our constitution, like remove the word mother and home from the constitution, and to put in a term for marriage that included other durable relationships without specifying what it was. And the government said that they would have to leave it up to the courts to decide that. So basically, in a nutshell, the people did not buy it. And the referenda, there were two, were defeated overwhelmingly by over 70% of the people who voted no. So that was really, I think it was the highest no vote in any referenda ever in Ireland. So that, I feel, marked a profound shift in the zeitgeist of the thinking of people in Ireland.
Why we are not hearing about this referendum in international media?
Well, isn't that very interesting? It could be due to the fact that our own media are probably and justifiably very embarrassed because they got it wrong with their predictions, as did the government. They also got it wrong. The people have spoken. The people have spoken. And I hope they continue to do so.
Very good, very good. We have to cover also this referendum here in Estonia. Absolutely. Thank you for informing us. Let's come back to the World Health Organization issues also in this interview. The same tendencies you were talking about are present also in new World Health Organization pandemic treaty and international health regulations. What problems are there?
Well, essentially, all these organizations, I feel, are all working together. They've become like supranational organizations. You've got the EU, you've got the UN, you've got the WHO, you've got the WEF. It's difficult to say who's exactly at the top. Some will say the WEF is at the top and the others are underneath. But basically, they're all working together, and they're all they're all interlinking with all their agendas. They're all the same. For example, like with the EU, we have had the recent Digital Services Act, which you're probably aware of because here in Estonia it would have been relevant for you as well. And then each of the individual states has to have its own hate speech laws to match the overarching Digital Services Act of the EU itself. So, in other words, all the agendas are working and operating together. They're all dovetailing together. And that's what I've noticed in my research about what's been happening. And this morning, for example, when we had this meeting with members of the Estonian Parliament, one of the things that I spoke about, because again, I consider that it would be very relevant for people in Estonia, because you are also members of the EU like Ireland, is the significant power of the EU with regard to all of these issues. And that, in fact, it was the EU who was the progenitor, of the entire WHO process to bring about this treaty and this, worldwide governance with regard to health. And I think it's also very interesting, and again, it shows you the connection between these organizations, that it all started in, I think it was February of 2021, when you had the EU Council meeting, which is the meeting at which all of the EU leaders meet and they decide on the political agenda for the EU. And at that meeting, they decided that they would work, that they needed a global health governance scheme and that they would work with the WHO to bring that about. So some months later then, the WHO set up its intergovernmental negotiating body. And basically, the WHO and the EU have been working in parallel with agreements, memorandums of understanding, and if the WHO makes a move, the EU makes a move. If the EU makes a move, the WHO makes a move. And then eventually we got to a situation where we had a regulation that was introduced by the EU regarding the COVID pass. You're probably familiar with that. The COVID pass legislation, which was in June of 2021. So that established the COVID pass and the infrastructure for that, including the technical infrastructure in terms of the concept of digitization, which I think is very relevant for you here in Estonia. So moving on from that, the WHO then, in 2 years later, in June also of 2023, announced a partnership, a major partnership with the EU to roll out this COVID-type pass, digital pass, for everything to do with global health and beyond. So it seems that they want to use it for much more than global health. So in many ways, what I think is happening and what others think is happening is that they're using what was the original COVID pass system developed by the EU. It's going to be taken on board by the WHO and then will be developed to really be a major part of all our lives, so that eventually we will need a digital pass to access all services, whether it's buying food or medicines or travel. And it's all being done under the guise of health. And then, of course, if they introduce the CBDCs, what we could end up with is a social credit score program like they have in China, where everything you do will be controlled, and your access to credit will be controlled. And if you're maybe not vaccinated or you haven't done something that they want you to do, then you may find that you will lose access to credit. So that's the danger of digitization, and that's the danger of centralized control and data sharing, where there's a centralized agency or even a couple of centralized agencies that have access to all of your data and all of your information, and how they can use it in this way to essentially control every aspect of our lives. So that is a real danger that we need to be aware of.
Absolutely. It's good to hear real critical thinking. Thank you for this interview.
Yeah, not at all. You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.